Hey guys, welcome back. There are a few famous character deaths in video games. Most of the characters who die are villains, the ones that we spend a lot of time struggling against and often feel good about when they are finally put down. Of course, there is a flip side, which is the rare instances when a hero dies. These moments are some of the darkest we see in these stories, and usually have far-reaching consequences for the rest of the narrative. There are some really famous ones too, but I'm not talking about them today. I'm talking about an even more rare moment in which a villain dies, and yet we really wish it hadn't come to that. Today's topic is that of Dyne from Final Fantasy VII, a solo boss you fight about 40% of the way through the game, and a character who has a lot of backstory with Barret. I'm going to talk about how his death was modified in the recent revisions of the story, and how censorship in general keeps weakening the retelling of stories from our youths. Kick back and relax, or at least try to, because this is a dark one. Let's get into it. Part 1. Dyne's life. Let's start by giving a brief overview of Dyne's life. He was born in Coral, grew up to be a coal miner, and was respected in the town. He and his wife Eleanor had a daughter, Marlene. Coral wasn't a rich place, but it got by with its exports. Shinra came to town promoting the hot new global energy source, Mako, and offered to build a new reactor in the nearby mountain while providing recurring income to the town for it. Many were quick to accept this deal, seeing how it would better their lives. Dyne was reluctant to accept, to throw away the town's heritage and coal mines. His best friend, Barret Wallace, talked him into accepting the deal, and so a reactor was built, and for a time the town flourished. The story differs here between the original game and Rebirth, but the broad strokes are the same. There was an accident at the reactor. It exploded, and to cover things up, Shinra came in and wiped out the town, burning everything. Barret and Dyne were away when this started, and as they rushed home, they were pinned down by a group of soldiers. In a dramatic moment, Dyne was hanging from a cliff, clinging to Barret's arm. A trail of bullets crossed their arms and Dyne fell below. Barret would survive the incident, find Marlene, and take her under his wing as his daughter. As for what happened to Dyne, that isn't entirely clear. We know he survived, and had the same operation Barret did, opting for a gun prosthetic. Dyne was left with nothing but a raving sense of revenge for what Shinra had done to his family, his town, and his life. He ended up in Coral Prison beneath the Golden Saucer, becoming the boss there, perhaps by choice instead of as a punishment. 4 years later, he and Barret would meet once more. Part 2. Dyne's Death. Dyne hates Shinra. It was by coincidence, or maybe fate, that when Cloud and his group were visiting the Golden Saucer, he was also there. He killed a bunch of Shinra employees before heading back down to Coral Prison. Given the description of a man with a gun grafted to his arm, not to mention the targets being part of Shinra, Barret was quickly marked as the prime suspect. Depending on the version of the story, Cloud and his friends are either thrown down into the prison due to their association with Barret, or forced to go down to find the real perpetrator. Once they catch up with Barret, he asks them to stay behind so he can confront Dyne alone. This is where the climax hits. The reunion has been recontextualized in Rebirth, and I will talk about that. But for the moment, I'm going to talk about the original. You see, in the confrontation, Dyne reveals that he has gone crazy and wants to kill everyone and everything, that his loss has completely consumed him. The guy even has 2 crosses set up outside of his shack, presumably for his wife and child. He speaks of hearing Eleanor's voice and is completely overcome with self-loathing. When Barret brings up that he saved Marlene, and that they could go see her in Midgar, Dyne loses it, declaring that he wants to take Marlene to her dead mother. The two have a fight. Barret wins, and he tries to persuade Dyne once more. However, Dyne doesn't see himself fit to be a father and believes that he has killed too many people. He takes a moment to lament how Marlene is now 4 years old and wouldn't even remember him. After giving Barret a pendant for his daughter, still wounded from the battle, he walks to the nearby cliff, spreads his arms, and falls off it to his death. Barret is of course distraught over this. He falls to his knees, lamenting that his hands are not any cleaner. Rebirth's version gives a similar but different series of events. When Barrett confronts Dyne, the man has been captured and tied up. Barrett starts to free his friend, but while the two are talking, it becomes very clear that Dyne has had a mental breakdown. He is actively hallucinating that Eleanor and Marlene are living with him, untying his friend and helping him out of the shack. It is then that Dyne sees Cloud in his soldier uniform. He starts to lose it, assumes that Barrett is still working with Shinra, and starts firing off his gun wildly. As Cloud and his friends take cover, Barrett and Dyne have their duel, but at the end, things are different. Barrett refuses to kill Dyne and disarms himself, giving Dyne a chance for his revenge, but the guy can't bring himself to do it. The big difference is that in this version of events, Cloud and his companions are being pursued by Shinra, and it just so happens that Shinra just now catches up to them. Dyne shoots at some of the soldiers while chaos ensues, leading Cloud and his friends to deal with the soldiers nearby. In the following moments, Dyne reveals that he wants to be with Eleanor and Marlene, but can't bring himself to do it. It's then that Barrett reveals what happened, that he saved Marlene, has her safe, and even shows him the picture he carries. As more soldiers approach, Dyne turns his attention to them and shoots them down while they litter him with bullets. Mortally wounded, Dyne turns to Barrett and then collapses on him. After telling Barrett to carry the guilt, he dies while seeing a vision of him coming home to his wife. For what it is worth, I think the version presented in Rebirth is better. It certainly hits harder and paints Dyne as more sympathetic. However, the choice to change this wasn't strictly from an artistic standpoint. You see, in the original game after the battle, Dyne committed suicide. Nowadays, this is something that can't be presented in Japanese media without adjustments due to the Zero rating system. While this is true, some people might think the change came strictly from the director, and that maybe he wanted to make a better story. I can tell you for a fact that isn't the case. To do so, we need to look at the third revision of this story, Dyne's Death in Ever Crisis. Part 3. The mobile game. Alright, a little background first. I started playing Ever Crisis a few months back because I wanted to record the story elements of it that relate to Rebirth. That's the stuff in the first Soldier story, and I will be talking about it more in later videos. What I found while playing Ever Crisis though, is that a lot of the base Final Fantasy VII story, as well as some of Crisis Core, are recapped in the game too, with their cutscenes remade in this art style. This of course includes the section in Coral Prison and with Dyne. The script they use seems to be nearly identical to the PS1 script, with some minor cleanups here and there, but it is otherwise faithful. They do adjust the story to include Yuffie formally in the party, so you can call this fan fiction if you want. The Plucky Ninja Girls edition aside, it's this scene with Dyne that I'm focused on. I was really curious if they would depict Dyne's suicide, and well, just have a look for yourself at what happens. That's right, they have a random Shinra grunt show up to gun him down. This absolutely reeks of censorship. I get that in the 90s, they could get away with a little more edge, and that some things have to be dialed back. The trail of blood in the Shinra building, for example, was redone to be Genova goo. Here in Ever Crisis, the blood is suspiciously missing despite the characters actively talking about it. In the situation of Dyne's death, I feel that him not committing the act fails to fully convey just how far gone he is, just how much Shinra's actions have broken him. It's worse because in the original game, especially at this point, the group isn't really being chased by Shinra in Coral Prison. so there is even less reason for this grunt to show up. At least in Rebirth, when they recontextualized the scene with Dyne, they did so in a way that both justified and enhanced what was going on, even if ultimately they were adjusting the scene to get around a character committing suicide. It's kind of similar to the adjustments they made with Zack's death in Crisis Core. Still, at the end of the day, this is all in service of adhering to the almighty Sero rating system. Part 4. The Consquences. Dyne's death is an important but ultimately minor part of the game. They didn't even bother to give the guy a last name, which is unusual considering how many minor characters do. You would think his connection to Marlene, who would go on to feature in a more important role in Advent Children, would earn him and Eleanor that much, wouldn't you? Anyhow, the censorship of Dyne's death might ultimately seem minor, but there are bigger consequences from this type of censorship happening. I already mentioned the blood trail in the Shinra building, but also consider the changes made to the Midgar Swarmer, though to be fair, it did still get impaled. I don't know, its fate just isn't as graphic if you ask me. In terms of censorship though, I'm talking about the big one of the most famous scenes in all of video game history, Aerith's death. If you haven't completed Rebirth, now is the time to click off, though I did give a spoiler warning at the start of the video, so I'll wait. Still here? Cool. So at the end of the game, Aerith dies. One criticism I've seen thrown around at this is about how confusing the scene is, and that it isn't exactly clear what is going on. We've had a year to digest it, and the general conclusion is that she dies here. That perhaps in every version of reality, she dies. Still, we don't get a clear depiction of this scene. Back in the PS1 game, the scene was clear and graphic. Sephiroth swoops down, impales her, and we see the act clearly in all its full motion glory. In Rebirth, we see a jumble of flashes and images that imply the act happened, but it isn't clearly shown. We don't even get the water scene afterward, where Cloud lays her to rest. I believe this is because of ratings. This graphic of a scene, especially with our modern technology and realistic rendering, likely would have pushed the game up in the ratings. It really shouldn't, especially considering the history of the game and just how famous this scene is. Sure, they tried to amp it up, tried to make it cinematic in other ways, but ultimately the question that has haunted the whole production of the remake project for me is, would they actually do it? The end result is that they couldn't, that at most they could imply what everyone knew would happen, but they could never outright show it. I think this is the biggest tragedy in gaming right now, that the original vision of these games can no longer be portrayed as they were intended due to ratings. Sure, there are other things to be upset about in the industry, such as the treatment of employees, weaponized addiction aimed at kids, and most recently, marginal increases to hardware specs at exorbitant prices. At the end of the day, we come to this hobby because we want stories. With this trilogy of games, we want a retelling of a story we already know, and it hurts to see that hindered by external forces. That is my perspective on it, and I welcome hearing yours in the comments below. Thanks for watching the video. If you like what I do, please share it, tell your friends, and help it get some traction. I really need to thank my Patreons and channel members who have stuck by me the last few months. Things have been rough because of a family crisis last summer, but I'm back now, and there will be regular content on my channel again. Thanks for watching to the end. As always, be safe, and I'll see you next time.